quite frankly, like, we're sent into the community and told, well, stop crime, and we're doing that, but people don't really trust us. And we'd rather have people actually wave to us and say hello and have a conversation with all 5 fingers than with just one finger. So we're like, well, we clearly need to make a change. Because if people don't trust us, if people feel we're not accountable, and if people don't really care what we're putting up on the white screen to show that numbers are going down, then we're not actually doing our job. So we needed to make a change, and we made that change. And kind of the spirit of that was the neighbor engagement unit. Being able to say, like, hey, we have officers that instead of just being kind of bogged down by the 911 system, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, like we have to respond to emergencies, we have to respond to the things that are happening now, we have to be able to investigate crimes, and the officers that are responding to those calls are really important, and the folks that are investigating crimes, they're really important. That's another very big part of what we do, and that also is part of community policing, of what we do, it's a philosophy. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to take time to be able to get to know the people in the neighborhood and get to know what people want from us. Because at the end of the day, policing is kind of based off in pillars. Like, it is about doing things like enforcing laws. We do have to sometimes arrest and prosecute people. That's a reality of the job. That's a reality of the job that, quite frankly, some of us don't enjoy all that much at times. But we know we have to do that because we have to have the safety. But it's also about prevention and deterrence and education. And those 3 pillars are just as, I would argue, more important than enforcement can ever be. Because don't we all want to live in a safe world where we're not just arresting people and putting them away, where we're actually preventing crimes before they happen, where we're actually solving disorder, where we're actually educating people about what's happening, where we're actually preventing things, where we're deterring things? Don't we want to actually not respond to violence? Don't we want to actually deter that violence from ever happening? So we need to be able to grow those programs. So the title of tonight's forum, and I'm not going to speak for that long because I'll speak forever and you guys are going to want to grab the old comedy show book out. This is about having a conversation. But the title of tonight's forum is about the state of policing in Albany right now. So the reality is when I left in 2017, we're still budgeted for this number. Please understand that. Nobody's cut our budget. We have 334 officers. Just about. We might have a few less. That's about the number that we have. We're short about 25% of our staff right now. As of today, we're short 83 officers. That is not unique to the Albany Police Department. That's not unique to the city of Albany. But that doesn't mean we get to bury our head and go, oh well, everybody's dealing with it. We're dealing with a staffing issue. That happened for a number of reasons. We're not the only field that it's hit. But at the end of the day, we're 83 people short. So that means there are a lot of things when it comes to those 4 pillars outside of enforcement, because at the end of the day, we respond to things that happen, those crises that we wind up not being able to do. So to give an idea of like when it comes to the shortages, when I left, we had 27 officers walking a beat. We're out of 27 officers walking a beat right now. We're at 12. Thank you. Joe's had to answer that question for me, I think, in the 3rd meeting now, so thank you. One of these days, I will remember that number, I promise. It's a little long, not much false numbers. But at the end of the day, like, that's a big difference. And that takes away from our ability to be able to take care of some of those disorder issues. So we need to, we're in the middle of a huge recruitment push right now. So jointheapd.com. Jointheapd.com. Media. You can pick anything up. Pick down, please. So we have a big open house this weekend from noon to 3 at our headquarters. The point of that open house, I'd love you all to come to see our headquarters, but the point of that open house is recruitment. So it's about people that want to be police officers, people that want to be dispatchers, because I'm talking about police officers, but we're short in other positions too. We're about 19 positions short in our dispatchers, in our dispatch center. We're short in some other places, but those are the two main things that we're really looking to highlight. We want people to do that. We have a test coming up in May. The deadline to sign up for the police test is April 3rd. So if people come on Saturday, they can sign right up. We're going to have folks that are going to be there to help sign people up. We started a meeting earlier today, talk about finalizing that. But we have a big push. We have a current list that we're working off of that we're going to have a class hopefully in May that we're going to hire and bring some other officers in. But that's going to take some time. But then we're also looking at like, okay, what are the other things we can do to alleviate some of the call volume that we have for our officers, recognizing that there's also things that, I just talked about that, there's other pillars, and there's other issues sometimes around disorder and some of the things we go to. So some of the things we're going to do is we are going to get some of the programs started that have kind of installed a little bit, and installed for a few different reasons. So we are going to get our crisis worker initiative off the ground. So that's that social work program. So the last ICAI meeting that I know you guys had was to talk about the social work program. So it's now being called the crisis work initiative. That's changed the title is for a reason. It's for really a legality reason behind MSWs and what they can do and what they can't do and who they can do it under. So we're in the process of hiring 3 supervisors. Those 3 supervisors for that program, crisis worker supervisors, once they come on board, they're going to help build that program. Those individuals are not going to be sitting behind desks. They're not going to be waiting for work to come to them. They are going to be out in the street. They're going to be working with individuals who have unmet behavioral health issues, individuals who are unhoused. They're going to be ultimately helping out answer some calls for service. So they're going to be another arm of first response. They're not going to be long-term case management. They're going to be another arm for first response. Well, probably they're going to get to know people. They're going to get to know the individuals that they ultimately need to work with. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be long-term case management. They're going to be like short to medium-term folks that are going to be dealing with folks. So if you think about like community response models, it's going to be like a community response model in the police department. We're going to have a direct tie to our neighborhood engagement unit. So we're going to work very closely with the officers that you guys see in this room here. So we're going to do a lot of work, but again, I want to make sure we're building that program. We've kind of described it that we're building the plane while we're flying it. And that's kind of a little bit accurate. But there's a number of models out there that we know that we can look to and get help. There's a group called Law Enforcement Action Partnership that does technical assistance around this work. There's a number of initiatives around the country that we know we can look to for policies and procedures. Even locally, there's the Accord program that happens in some of the different areas of the county. So there's some folks, Dr. Giordano, somebody I've talked to about 10,000 times anyways, but I've talked to him about this initiative itself a bunch of times. So we'll get that off the ground. So we have to be smart about the things we're going to do. We're also going to look to bring some retired people back. We found during the pandemic, there was a position at the state. So if everybody's aware, for the state, there's a cap that if you retire and you're collecting a pension, there's a cap that you can only collect so much of a salary before your pension gets frozen. There was a position that was created from the state to actually work through that, where we can bring back retired police officers. They won't be police officers, but they'll be peace officers. That will free up desk officers and some other positions to be able to bring those individuals back and get more officers on the street to be able to do things like bolster our beat officers, bolster our detective division, do other things that we need to do. So we have to be smart about what we do to create those things. But community policing is always going to be the foundation of what we do. It has to be, because again, public safety is a partnership. And it's not just a partnership with folks like our district attorney's office and the police department. It's a partnership, where they are a youth partner and been ready with us as always. But it's a partnership between us and the community. And that is the whole point of really when ACPAC started, was this recognition that we need to have a community voice with what we do. We need to make sure that the community has an input and understands that when we actually are looking, so whether it's creating a policy, whether it's doing our day-to-day activities, making sure that we hear from you, that we take what you're saying, and that we put that to our day-to-day practices. And then also, like, when we're going to make a change, that there's a venue for us to do. So I don't know how many people remember this, but what color cars do we drive right now? Black and white. Anybody remember what we drove 10 years ago? White cars. Well, like 10 years ago, there was a proposal about, hey, we'd like to go back to black and white cars from some officers that wanted to make a change. Well, we used them, and I'm just talking about a very simple thing that we were able to use. We talked to the folks at ACPAC at the time, said, hey, there's a proposal internally about changing what our cars look like. Can we get this out to the community and see what the community has to say? There was a survey that went out, and the community came back. I don't remember what the actual results were, but they were pretty overwhelming. That was like, hey, okay, change the cars, go to black and white. So the avenue for communication is really important to us. The avenue of, like, what do you all think? Ray can tell you, our original ACPAC meetings, we asked 3 questions of the community. What are we doing well? What are we doing well? And how can we work better together? Those are 3 questions that are still really important for us. So with that, I'm going to stop talking so we can actually have an discussion.
Thank you, work. I did want to add to what the chief said about ACPAC being a communication mechanism. ACPAC meets once a month, and our meetings are open to the public. You don't have to be an ACPAC member if you want to come and talk about something, if there are agendas that you're concerned about. If you are in a ward that happens to not be represented and you don't want to be the representative, but you want to say something about what's going on in your ward, then everybody is welcome to the ACPAC meetings. I don't do this very well. We did, before we did this session, we did put out on social media that we were welcoming questions ahead of time. And we got a lot. So we're going to try and work through the questions that we got ahead of time and the questions that you all have raised tonight. And I'm going to ask Stefan to start doing questions.
So some of these questions are overlapping, so I'm going to try to move some of them together. But Chief, you mentioned the crisis work initiative. Several of the questions are asking about, one, how do you see this working as a potential co-responder model? What's its relationship to Accord, if that's still being expanded to the city? And a related but somewhat separate question. Someone asked if you're willing to explore potential for a collaboration between the Albany Police Department and a community mutual aid rapid response team. Stone Soup Mutual Aid is working to provide trained community members.
So the way I see this working is the folks that are in the crisis workers are going to work for the police department. While at times I see them working hand in hand with officers in that traditional co-response model where it's an officer and a crisis worker, I see the majority of the time them working in tandem as crisis workers out on the street, handling calls, handling issues, working with individuals, whether it's on that behavioral health issues, on housed folks, on sheltered folks, and really problem solving and connecting those folks to services. So I see it as a little bit of a hybrid of co-response, and community responders isn't the right term because they're going to be working for the police department. It'll be kind of similar. Rochester has a similar initiative where they actually work for the city as opposed for the community responders. I have open arms if Accord also expanded and came into the city. The way I look at it is that, this will be ultimately 12 individuals that work for us. While that sounds like a lot, based on the needs that I think this community has right now, I think that our services will be taken up pretty quickly, especially because we will be looking to do this. And I say 24/7, I think it will have 24/7 type coverage. I think we have yet to determine if it will be a full 24/7, but I see it having close to 24/7 coverage. So to me, to have additional resources like those that Accord has, I think make some sense. As to the third part, I'm willing to sit down and collaborate and talk to anybody.
Thank you. So another couple questions here are asking about accountability measures. And one that's come up several times is, will APD respect and support the Community Police Review Board? Specifically, will you be rescinding Chief Hawkins' mandate for officers not to comply with subpoenas?
So that's already been rescinded. Officers already are complying with the subpoenas as far as attending. I can't comply, I can't force an officer to comply with any answering of questions at the hearing, but attending the hearing, officers are attending hearings.
Excellent.
Several other questions focused on what will APD be doing to protect marginalized communities, specifically LGBTQ+, transgender communities, especially given the national event.
So, the one thing that I've always loved about this community is how diverse it is and that partnership. In Our Own Voices has always been a very big partner of ours. In Our Own Voices, NYCLU were very big partners when we first initiated a number of our policies, a number of our trainings, and we do have some follow-up that we need to do based on a lot of the national landscape and ensuring that not only are our policies up to date, which I know they are, but that our trainings are meeting what they need to meet. And then I think that the other thing I want to make sure that we're doing is, especially because I know we've done this with our current officers, but as we're hiring additional officers, as we're hiring additional staff, as we're hiring the crisis workers, that we're ensuring that we're getting to know those populations, so that way folks understand this diverse community. I've always told our officers, and especially anybody that's going to be working within the community, I know this sometimes sounds controversial, and it's not meant to sound controversial, but it's meant for people to understand they are now part of this community. I don't really care where somebody came from. Like, we get people, I grew up in the city. We get people that come from the suburbs. We get people who come from downstate. We get people sometimes that come from out of state. I don't really care where they came from, but I want them to know that they are now part of this Albany community. And this Albany community is extremely diverse. And they now need to be a part of it. And whatever their, I don't want to call them values and morals, although values and morals are certainly part of it. Whatever those were, they now need to adapt to the values and morals of this community and understand the members of this community. And if they had any kind of bias, if they had any kind of beliefs that don't fit with this community, they need to change those. And they need to understand that that's not acceptable.
One of the questions that was raised was if at the federal level there are FBI people and other kinds of law enforcement people being dismissed, laid off. Is that a pool that we would be looking at to fill any of our missing officers? And if so, would we be doing appropriate, because it fits with what you just said appropriate retraining with them so that they adopt the culture of our police department.
Yeah, one of the things, and I'm going to change. I'm going to make a slight change as to the pool of applicants. So, regardless of who we were to hire, they will fit the norms of this community, and we will train them to ensure that they do. I do want to take advantage of. I say take advantage of. It's sad. People being laid off at the federal level, I would like to take advantage of that and open the doors. I think that's appropriate. Those folks, depending on where they come from, pretty much any position, they're not eligible to just lateral in. So even if you're a federal law enforcement, you can't just lateral into a state, to a city municipal law enforcement. You can only lateral into municipal law enforcement if you are already a certified New York State police officer. So it's not like they can just lateral into this police. They actually have to go through the entire process. But I would welcome them to apply and take the test, and they would go through the same process. But even when we talk about lateral police officers, they're going to be held to the same standards that everyone else would be held. We're short staffed. We need to change how we look at hiring from a different level. That doesn't mean we need to drop standards. That doesn't mean we need to take somebody who doesn't fit with this community, who doesn't have the values that we want. And when I say we need to change the way we hire, we have an antiquated civil service system. Anybody hasn't figured that out yet? We have an antiquated civil service system. We give a civil service test. We used to only give one a year. We fought, and Melissa, thank you, because Melissa helped push this along. We now are giving 2 tests this year. But we have to have somebody register for the exam, take the exam, wait for it to get scored by the state, return that score to the city, and then we get those scores and we can finally start processing them. And it goes through a whole process. Now, I'm going to age myself, but I have 2 kids that are 27 and 24. Does anybody think my 24-year-old is going to follow that process? Or do you think he's going to go on Indeed or LinkedIn and he's going to apply for a job on his phone and he's going to wait for somebody to go, oh, you got a Zoom interview tomorrow and you can find out tomorrow what the process is and whether you're going to get hired? He's going to follow like that Zoom interview because his attention span is about 30 seconds long, unless we're talking about the Celtics. That's about it. So we need to change our process. We don't need to change. We don't need to lower our standards. We need to change our process. So we're already talking internally about we still need to give a test. Like, that's fine. But we need to give a continuous test. We need to be able to say, oh, you're interested in becoming a police officer? Great. Here's the QR code. Sit down, take the test. We're going to get the test scored, and we're going to start the process and hire you. I don't need to wait till I have a police academy every 6 months to hire somebody. I can hire somebody once I get their test score, once we do all their background, once they do their psychological, once they do their physical. There's still a whole bunch of things we got to do. Like, I can't just automatically say you're a cop, because there are a bunch of standards we have to uphold. But once they get to that process, why am I going to make them sit around and wait until I have an academy when somebody else can scoot in and take them away? Because again, no offense to this generation, they don't have any attention span waiting. When I was a kid waiting to get on this job, yeah, I applied for other jobs, but I wanted to be an Albany cop, plain and simple. Somebody else was going to call, this is where I wanted to be. That same feeling just isn't there anymore for our youth. It just isn't. I'd love to see us get it back, but it's just a different world we live in. So I want to make it to where we can automatically hire people, because there's plenty of things we can have those people that we hire do. Like, they can learn the department, they can learn our values, they can learn our community, they can be out in the community working. We can do plenty of things with them before we start our police academy. But we have to change that. We have to change our process. So that way we're not sure. Yeah, they might not be out answering calls for service, but they're ours. We can mold them to be the Albany police officers that we want them to be, that you want them to be.
Keeping on this topic of recruitment and retention, two questions here that are related. So first, is the department willing to consider an incentive for officers to live in Albany, like a property tax credit or a live on my block incentive? And relatedly, do you think pay is a factor in why the Albany Police Department is down? Yeah.
So, I mean, listen, I think any incentive for after officers are hired to say, hey, there's an incentive to move into the city, to stay in the city, I think are great. I think there's an awful lot of reasons why officers or anybody else doesn't wind up. You know, tell you my personal story if you want. It's fine with me. At the end of the day, like, I think those incentives are great. I'll also tell you the controversial thing. I said this on a Zoom call not that long ago for a call. Like, again, like, my expectation, and I know the officers all in this room, like, and I know they are. They're all part of this community. Like, I expect our officers to be part of this community. No matter where they lay their head and sleep, I expect them to be part of this community. And I know they can be part of this community without residing in this community, because I've seen it happen day in and day out. Does that mean that I don't think it would be great for officers to live in the city? Of course it doesn't mean I don't think it would be great. So if there could be incentives for officers to be in the city, yeah, that's great. Again, I grew up, I lived in the city, I owned my first house that I owned in the city. I moved out for a very specific reason when it came to the education of my oldest son, who had some special needs. So at the end of the day, like, there's all kinds of reasons why people make decisions they make. So I don't think there's, like, incentives like that. I think are great. What was the second part? I'm sorry.
Are they possible?
Are they possible?
Yeah,
I think
is it
everything's
possible to do that kind of incentive?
Yeah, I think everything's possible.
Is it within, is it within our purview to just make that decision? What kind of process would
So
have to happen?
Carol asked me, is it possible for that to happen? I mean, I think everything's possible. I'm a department head. I don't, like, I can make recommendations. I control my budget. Within my budget, is that incentive possible? No.
Okay.
Within the realm of the city, is that possible? Of course that's possible. You know, I think there's all kinds of things that the city can do. I would suggest a different forum and speak to different people. What was the second part of that? Pay. So I don't ever want to say that pay is not a factor in recruiting and retention. So I will always advocate that our pay is not enough when we compare it to suburban departments and other departments in our area. And it's hard to look nationwide because it depends on what you're looking at. But when you look at departments in our area, no. These guys and the other officers that are out there doing their job don't get paid enough when it compares to other departments in the area. Plain and simple. And yes, that is a factor. In talking to a lot of the officers in this room and in going around to roll calls, especially when I first got back, and trying to get some really good honest feedback, which I really thank the officers because they were honest. Pay wasn't the number one issue, and especially wasn't the number one issue why a lot of officers might have been leaving, especially officers without a lot of time on. It was quality of life. So the health and wellness of our officers has got to be first on our minds. And obviously you asked the question when it came to retention, we have to make sure that we're not asking officers to work 80 hours, 100 hours a week. you know, everybody looks, and I don't mean to pick on the media, I know you guys are here and I appreciate the fact you guys are covering this. But people like to cover, well, geez, look at how much the officers are making. You know, 2 weeks ago, you know, the media outlet, here's the top 10 of officers and what they made. Okay, great. And they didn't get to see their family for 10 straight months and get to do anything with their families. And they were here 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and missed holidays and birthdays. And they're burned out and exhausted. So we need to find a healthy balance between work life and home life, and how we give them the opportunities to be able to step away and take a breather and not live this life 24 hours a day. You know, I'm gonna step back to the question you asked. Like, one of the, you know, we talk about incentives to live in the city. Sometimes the reason why an officer may make a decision to say, I'm gonna live, instead of where I'm working, I'm gonna live one town, a suburb over, is because when they drive into their driveway at midnight, a town over, they feel like they can take a breath, because they don't feel the pressure of, I'm at work 24 hours a day. So we don't always take that into consideration when we say, well, geez, we'd love to give officers an incentive to live in the city. And again, like, that comes from somebody who's like, yeah, I would love to see us all live in the city. And again, you can all like be like, where do you live? Because you all know I don't live in the city right now. So I get that. But at the same time, like, sometimes it's, hey, the officer got to take a breath when they drove into their house in Colony, because they feel like, okay, it has nothing to do with the quality of life being better in Colony, because guess what, it's not. The quality of life in Albany is better. But they don't work in Colony, so they get to be like, all right, I'm in my home in Colony, like, I don't feel like I've got to be aware of every little thing that's happening right this second. I can relax for a minute. So it's also about their quality of life.
Keeping, I think, maybe one more on this, you know, the issue of staffing and retention, more so staffing here. In a period of persistent personnel shortages, how does APD strategically allocate limited resources to support community policing goals? How much input does the community have in those decisions? And relatedly, someone asked, given the current staffing levels, how do you plan on addressing patrolling in 12th Ward along Washington Ave extension with the relocation of Camino Nuevo?
So, as far as how we allocate, you know, we have to look at a number of things. So, you know, one thing is, you know, we will not be taking any further resources away from what we currently have for our beats, for our school resource, for our preventative programs like track and enhanced supervision, and we would be looking at ways where we can be innovative to add to those, regardless of our staffing shortages. We're trying to figure it out. As far as community input, I mean, please, like, we need input. Like, people need to tell us, like, what they're seeing, what they want to know, what they want, and we'll have open and honest conversations. If we can do it, we can do it. If we can't, we can't. And I guess I'll just give one example of how we increased. Like, if we know there's a real need, we're going to fill it, and we're going to figure out what to do. So, like, recently, when I first came back, there was a clear need. We were down to 2 school resource officers. That wasn't acceptable to me. It wasn't acceptable to the school district, and I don't think it was really acceptable to the community. And, you know, you talk about trying to be aware of what's happening here, what's happening nationally. I was concerned with what might be coming down the pipeline when it comes to immigration issues and others. So we said, no, we need to have a 3rd school resource officer, because I think everybody in this room knows this, because most of you are familiar faces. Our school resource officers, they're not there. You know, we talked about the 4 pillars of what we kind of look at. Like, they're not there to arrest people, to arrest our kids. They're not there to enforce the law. They have to enforce the law with kids or an adult, because God knows adults are usually the ones that are causing the problems. They'll do what they need to do. But they're there to bridge the gap with our youth. ACPAC had a role in this. When we did our strategic plan back in 2014, winning over a generation was a big strategic goal. And winning over a generation was about making sure that we had positive ties with our youth, and that was also about a long-term engagement with our youth, about ensuring that we actually had our kids want to grow up and be officers, especially when it came to having our department reflect what our community looked like. Because at the end of the day, we have to have our kids want to be cops if we're ever going to reflect what the community looks like. So we want to make sure we have those positive influences. So Brian is now in North Albany, so that is a big part of why we did that. So we'll always make strategic decisions based on that. Right now, it's kind of rob Peter to pay Paul situation. So that's some of the strategic. That doesn't sound very strategic, but at the end of the day, sometimes that's the way we have to do it. But that we need input sometimes from community partners to know, like, hey, these are things we're seeing, so we sometimes can make a decision to do things. We also have, keep in mind, like, our philosophical vision is community policing. So yes, it is the everyday officers that are out on the beat. Yes, it's the everyday officers that are working in the patrol division and answering calls. But we also do have, I just talked about not overworking officers, but we do have a number of grants that are open to us. So, like, we can staff different things with funding from those grants. Most of those are state-driven grants. So, like, Pine Hills neighborhood, that was just driven by, we wanted to make sure, especially with the students, we wanted to make sure kegs and eggs didn't go off because there was some information in kegs and eggs. So SUNY was a huge partner in that. We weren't so worried about St. Patrick's Day or the parade day necessarily, but we had the weekend before that a bunch of different details out. So there's a lot of different things. As far as the methadone clinic goes, we will make sure that we monitor that movement. I'm going to go on my high horse for a minute, because here's where you all can play a role. We need to just stop forcing people that need life-saving medicine to go to a clinic to get their medication, and just forcing these clinics to go open up in neighborhoods where people don't want the clinic because they don't want the disorder. I don't know about anybody else, but anybody else have any kind of medication on them? I do. Does anybody else have to go to a clinic to get that medication? I don't. I go to a pharmacy. When my medication's ready, I get a little text, and CVS tells me, hey, Brendan, your medication's ready. Stop by and get that. I'm going to swear for a second. It's a bunch of bullshit that people have to go to a clinic to get life-saving medication. So maybe everybody can, like, write the DEA and tell them to stop their nonsense that you have to go to a clinic 6 days a week to get your methadone, and that you should actually get a prescription for it, and stop the judgment and the stigma. And then we don't have that problem anymore. Because that's what that is. It's a bunch of nonsense.
However, the nonsense is going to.
Well, the nonsense is going on, but
Right,
guess what?
so-
That's the power. That's the power of this room.
What do we do to respond to the people who are concerned
Well,
about?
again, we will
That
work
was
with
the
the
question.
neighborhood. I get that's the question, but that's
That
the
was the
power
question.
of community, right? Is that the community can actually advocate and help change things. That's what I would like to see. We will certainly respond to complaints. We will work. We work very closely. The gentleman who ultimately oversees security there, he's a retired Albany police detective. He actually does a really good job on Central Ave. And in truthfulness, like, some of the issues are, again, real. Some of the issues are perceived. Some of it is stigma and judgment. But there's an awful lot of people here. So maybe somebody can take up a petition and deal with something with it.
Okay.
So we have several questions here related to the federal level about the national federal persecution of immigrant communities. So two questions are, one, will APD respect the city's sanctuary status and refrain from assisting ICE? And a related question, a little bit different, when ICE stops someone, can another person help or can the police help?
So understand, so as far as, we had a forum from, with Kana the other night, and I guess I'll answer the sanctuary piece the way it was kind of answered the other night. I mean, sanctuary is kind of one of those words that's made up, but yes, this is a safe city for immigrants. We do not enforce civil law. So immigration issues, 99% of the time, are civil issues. We do not enforce detainers. That is our policy. We do not enforce immigration law. The only time that we enforce anything is if it's a judicial warrant. So I want to make sure everybody understands that if there's a judicial warrant, like that is a judicial warrant. It's a warrant signed by a judge. Like there is no option for us. Like we enforce that. So if we come across somebody and they have a judicial warrant, we enforce that. The overwhelming majority of the time that we would come across that is if we had somebody in our custody, we had arrested them, and we get a hit back on them on that warrant from their fingerprints. So that is the time we would have it. But in that case, we would execute that. We would hold that person based on that warrant. And we don't have a choice in that. I will say what I said the other night. When it comes to civil law, like we don't deal with civil law. Like I'll compare this, and I don't mean to I said this the other night. I don't mean to sound, because I realize what the fear in this, and I understand the real fear that people have. We don't enforce tax law, nor do we in fact enforce immigration law. So, like, if the IRS came out and said, "Hey, there's somebody who hasn't paid their taxes," I wouldn't send officers out to enforce the fact that they have not paid their taxes. If they sent me a detainer and said this person has not complied with immigration, I don't enforce that. That's not our place to do that. As far as interfering with ICE, no, do not interfere with ICE. They are a federal law enforcement agency. It ultimately is their responsibility to ultimately address immigration law. So, no, we will not, the police will not interfere with them, and I would certainly recommend that no citizen do that. If you want to document what you see, document what you see. But I also, and I said this the other night, like, I can't have it both ways, right? I can't say to the federal government, I don't enforce immigration law. My officers don't do that. And then say, but you also can't come here and do something that you are charged to do. So we don't have to like that, but I also can't then turn around and be like, sorry, these are the boundaries of my city, you can't come here.
There's a question.
Yes,
Hi,
ma'am.
my name is Shadi Delgado. I'm the founder of Source Mutual Aid. I want to ask, because yes, I understand, the broader perspective of everything you're saying, but I am still not hearing like actionable things. I understand that your perspective is that you're not going to enforce these regulations or these mandates, but the reality is that there's nothing written that we can actually enforce that. So I wanted to know, like, what are actionable things, for example, if maybe not the whole APD, but one of your officers does call because there's a person in the office, right, that is an immigrant. Like, what would you do then?
No, we have a written training bulletin. We follow the AG's, the New York State Attorney General's office guidance. So no, we do have that.
Okay,
Yeah.
Then I would like to learn a little bit more about like those like practical things.
Yeah.
that-
Oh yeah,
that you
absolutely.
have in place, and maybe, as you said, like citizens cannot necessarily interact or intervene, right, with federal officers or with ICE and officers, but you can definitely, there are other ways to engage in specific ways that are not necessarily considered interference. So, taking that into account, like, is APD going to support in any way, like, the different community, like RISE, for example, that it's doing, a no harboring, I don't remember the specific word, but no harboring versus assisting immigration, like, is that something that APD is looking to look into to implement or help the community in terms of, right now, if you're asking for community policing, we have to understand what are the limitations and responsibilities as communities to be able to interfere or to support.
I guess I need to understand a little more. I mean, what I'm saying is that our policy is that we do not cooperate or enforce immigration law.
Okay?
So we're not notifying ICE of anything. And I can get you all the information, so we can talk offline. I guess I don't know what I guess I don't understand what you mean by, like, assist the organization. Like, that's what I don't know what you mean.
So there are limitations, right, and there are responsibilities still enforced and still in place. Recognizing and understanding what are our responsibilities, civil responsibilities, right, in terms of being able to effectively cooperate without interfering, but still advocating and upholding the dignity and humanity of the people that are being interfered with.
Okay. And I think what would be important, and there were some really good panelists that I think the other night at the CANA meeting that have far more expertise from the legal end. Like, I don't think the police are the right people to give that information. I do think making sure that there would be some attorneys that could come out, and I support this 100%, that could do some really good sessions on, like, knowing your rights and understanding what you can do and what you can't do is the right forum for that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Or does that not make
I have a few
sense?
questions, but we can definitely
Okay.
take this offline and have another conversation. But yes, thank you for the answer.
Okay, yeah, let's talk more about this. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we want to
Go
start.
after this. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I follow directions, so.
Yeah.
Give him the question.
What?
Take it out there? Yeah.
I think a practical matter with regard to some of what you're talking about is that when ICE is purporting to have a judicial warrant, when they do not, and they intimidate either activists or other people to comply with an administrative warrant that actually is not judicial, that's a violation of their process and procedure, and that I don't know that it would qualify as something where the city would want to take a stand with regard to those kinds of misapplication of law.
Don't do that again.
I mean, first of all, John, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're out and about. Again, I really think that's a legal question that somebody in the legal world needs to answer. And I mean, obviously, I believe that everybody in law enforcement should follow appropriate policies, procedures, should not do things like that. I can't necessarily answer for ICE. I can only answer for Albany PD. And there is there is a line between advocacy and our response and what we can and what we will and will not do in that. So I mean, I want to have further conversations with you about it. Okay.
So we have a couple more here we're going to get to, and I think there are some people in the audience. Saw some hands, so we'll send some microphones around. So related to what the audience member over here said, sorry, I don't remember your name, but what Shadi mentioned before about what can the community do. We have a couple questions here about what can we as citizens do to be good partners in the community policing partnership. Someone asked specifically, as a restorative practitioner and trainer, what can people do to help with the implementation of community policing in the city?
So I think Kyle talked about this originally when we first started. For open positions on ACPAC, we definitely want to make sure ACPAC is full. I think that's one way that definitely starts. And then as far as, if you're a practitioner, especially if you have something like restorative justice, if you have an initiative, let's make sure we're connecting. we have a lot of initiatives that we run. We want to make sure that, one, if there's an initiative you have that we can refer people to, let's do that. Two, if you have a service or a connection that we can ultimately utilize together, like, let's do that. Like, I mean, I didn't get into prevention, deterrence, and education much, but there's a lot of programming that we provide in the city. There's a lot of programs we're a part of, and we're always looking for other connections. So, especially when it comes to things like youth violence. So there might be a really good connection there with different programming, whether we're working with our kids in schools, whether we're working, we're about to have a youth call-in with kids that are involved in gun violence that we might want to connect them with afterwards. So to know you guys are out there and what your initiatives are, those are things we're going to want to be able to know and understand. So I think those two things are really important.
Go ahead. No, okay. I did want to say that at the back, there are some small clipboard things with a question on them for those of you in the audience who have thoughts about what you think ACTBAC should be doing and what you would like to see community discussions on. Like, when we sit down and say, what should the next forum or the next community discussion be about, it's important to know what the community wants to talk about. So as you leave, would you make sure to contribute to that, whatever you think? And we also have, we have a web page, right? Right, we have a web page where you can also go on and do that, but you can fill out the forms now, and it will help give us guidance to be responsive to what it is that the community wants to talk about. And we do have a question back. That's right, Ray?
Yeah, let's see.
It's good to see you, Ray.
And then in the back also, yeah.
Chief, you just mentioned the various initiatives, and one of the best programs that I remember was the Citizens Police Academy. Will you still be having a police academy this year?
Yeah, the police academy is actually posted. Ben, forgive me. When's the date coming up? I know you just sent it out. I apologize. Okay, we'll look it up and we'll get it out to everybody.
It's Wednesday evening, and let me just double check. The start date is April 16th.
Thank you.
Wednesday through the beginning of July.
Thank you. So April 16th, Wednesday through June.
But I recommend anybody, particularly ACTBAC members, take that class, because you learn a lot, you get to appreciate a lot of what the officers have to go through by not only the technicalities of the law, but the technicalities of the street. So, anybody here interested, check out that website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, there's a question back here, and then we'll come over here next. Yeah, share your hand up.
It might be helpful to ask Ben to talk about the...
Hi, my name is Jackie Powell. I have like two questions. You know how the Army have the JROTC? Do you think in the near future they could do something like that with the police for the for school children? Because a lot of high school kids, they interaction with the police is usually negative. That's just one. My second part question is, a lot of us black mothers, try to teach our young men and women how to speak to the police officer when they're being stopped. But sometimes the police attitudes is truly suck. I had an incident with the police, and it was a young girl, and clearly she could see that I'm older than her, and her attitude, it really stunk, and it just made me, even though I kept my, composure, I was just looking at her like, are you here to help me or try to, downgrade me? So, I mean, how we as grown-ups should talk to them, especially when their attitudes sometimes stink. I know they be having hard days, but some of us has hard days too. And, for my situation, it was really like, I know a lot of people know that, my daughter outside Hemingway Powell was murdered. And I had an incident with my granddaughter and my daughter's boyfriend. And when I called the police, I mean, the young lady, her attitude just stunk. And then a couple of months later, not even months, or a couple of weeks later, it was another incident. And I think that incident would have been avoided if she had stopped being nasty and just listened to me, you know?
Yep.
And she even let the guy get away, like, leave. Okay, that's it.
No, thank you, and I'm sorry that happened, and certainly I expect everybody to treat everyone with, respect and dignity, and you should never feel like you were treated that way. So I apologize for that. To your first point, absolutely. Nick, Brian, and Nicole can certainly talk to a lot of the programs that they run in the schools. They do an amazing amount of work in the schools. One of the programs I'll talk about, just very quickly, so we do have a cadet program. So we take a lot of young adults. So we have an Explorer program within PAL and then a cadet program. Those two programs do act as initiatives to bring youth along, especially youth that are interested in law enforcement. Sometimes there are youth that don't even know that they'd be interested in it. And then during the summer, for the summer employment, summer youth employment program, we run another, it's similar to the cadet program, although the cadet program is, we actually employ young adults with the idea that they will eventually become police officers, and they work part-time while they're going to school and then learn about the police department. During the summer youth employment kids, so Ray was talking about the Citizens Police Academy, they do a youth Citizens Police Academy and get to understand what the police department does, how officers interact, get to know officers. So we do a number of those, and I think we always look to do more because we want to get to know more kids and have more of that interaction positively.
My daughter worked with the youth program, and she was taking care of the daughter, and she came home, she was so unhappy, because, after a while, you know, why you
Yeah.
the summer youth program,
Yeah,
good for the kids.
yeah. And when I was here the last time, one of the neatest things I saw with the kids was that when the summer youth kids were coming, at the time they were going to 50 Lark, and most of the kids were bringing because their shirts said police cadets on them. They weren't wearing their shirts. They were coming and putting their shirts on when they got there. And within, I think, like 3 weeks, they were all wearing their shirts back and forth. So it was kind of neat to see them, go from, hey, we don't want to show what we're doing, and next thing you know, they're walking through the hill with their shirts on. So it was kind of neat.
And I thank you for that. Thank you.
And we have another question coming here, but real quick, one of the first questions I got on the card that we didn't get to, there's two related ones about quality of life. One being what's being done about motorcycles, bikes during the summer, and also occupying vacant buildings. Who should be called?
Yeah, so, for the vacant buildings, just call either 438-4000. Obviously, if there's some kind of emergency, call 911. So over the winter, we had several fires in several of those vacant buildings. So if you see something that needs immediate response, call 911. But if you just recognize that, hey, the boards are off, or hey, think somebody's living in there, call the 438-4000 number. That will get either a police or fire response, and then we will get a hold of buildings and codes to re-secure that building. That obviously is a big issue. And then we will make sure that we come up with the appropriate responses. I know last year there was a big detail to address a lot of the motorcycles, especially a lot of the unregistered dirt bikes throughout the city. That's been an issue for many years now. I know it's an issue that continues to grow. I think we need to make somewhat of an appeal to a lot of adults for their kids, but I also know that it goes beyond kids, because it goes into
It's adult.
adults. So, we will be enforcing those laws, we will be towing the ones that are unregistered, uninsured. One of our issues is that we always have to balance the safety of everybody, including the person that's on that motorcycle, that ATV. So we always have to balance how far we go if the person takes off. So what we do many times is use our investigative tools to, if that bike does take off, that doesn't mean we don't follow up and do an investigation and potentially find that person later on, find that bike, and get that off the street.
Thanks, Chief. I know we have hands over here, but someone's been waiting over here for a
Okay,
second.
thank you. So my question relates to crime scene cleanup and OVS reimbursement for crime scene cleanup. The reason I ask this question is because I know a family in New York City whose son was murdered in front of their house and in the middle of the night, and the police came and, did what they had to do, but then they told the family that they would send somebody to, clean up, what was in front of their house, and never did. And then the family called the police later, that day and said, well, are you sending somebody? And they said, well, we don't do this. So the father had to clean up himself, where some of his, blood and everything of his son would have been killed. So I posed this question to OVS, and they say, well, we'll reimburse for it. But I said, well, how would somebody know, what the procedure is? I mean, most people don't have this kind of information, So I'm just the point of my question therefore is, what is does Albany Police Department have a policy for communicating to people? If there's a murder or a crime scene cleanup, how they go through this process, what the process is, who they should call, I think that's my question.
So, as far as if it's external and there's something in the street, it will normally get washed down. A lot of times the fire department will wash it down and we'll have DGS respond. If it's on private property, it does wind up going back to the folks that live there. And I think we can always do better to try to figure out better responses for trauma and how you address that. The simple fact of the matter is that there's not a lot of services that are out there, and most of those services do cost money, and most of those services are looking for money up front. And then obviously, like you said, Albany County Crime Victims is who they would file their claim with, and they would have to wait for reimbursement. So, when those things do come up, obviously we try to handle those issues as much as we can with care. We do try to make sure people get connected to crime victims. But as far as, we do not have a service that we turn to and we send to do those kind of cleanups. That is not something that we provide. It's not something that most police departments across the country provide. I know it sounds horrible, and I think the trauma that happens, especially from violent crime, does not always get immediately addressed. It's usually getting addressed afterwards. We do try to have follow-up with victims of violent crime, especially with families that lose people. But it's also something that we need to continue to work on.
Well, yeah, there might be a need that,
Yeah.
needs to be looked at and addressed. Thank you.
Saw hands, back over here.
Okay, I'd like to respond to that. When there is, like the chief said, if it's on public property, then usually it's handled by the city. We try to get through pretty quickly. However, if it's on private property, where the gap is that the officers have to at least be able to inform families that there are available resources and either connect them to Urban Grief or connect them to SNUG or connect them to Albany County Crime Victims and Sexual Violence Center. Once that connection is made, any victim advocate can complete a compensation application requesting compensation for crime scene cleanup. The challenge becomes the time frame, right? Because when you have crime scene cleanup, especially if it's in your house, you want that to happen quickly. And so there's a gap between available service providers and who pays in the interim
in how we navigate reimbursement. So like, for instance, for Urban Creek, if that was a case that was presented to us, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do that OBS application, but depending on the crime and the circumstances and what is needed, that might be something that we have a budget for, where we can kind of take care of on behalf of the family. So I think there are resources. Where the gap is on the community side for victims, especially of violent crimes, is that sometimes the officers are doing what they do, and there's not maybe that third party there that is also kind of taking in all of the things that might be impactful for victims. Police investigate, other people can offer a different kind of support or whatever. So sometimes, many times, people don't know what that information is. And then also, many people live in rental properties. And so when you have a rental property and crime takes place in a rental property, now you have to deal with the landlord, and you have to deal with their, whatever their issues may come up with regard to insurance. And I know it's hard to believe, but many landlords evict people after violent crime occurs within their properties. Doesn't matter the level of trauma, tragedy, none of that. Many people face eviction, rapid eviction, or harassment by landlords or non-responsive landlords very quickly after violent crime. So, that's a victim question. If there's more questions, that's something that we can help facilitate. Anytime you can give us a call, we'll advocate and help facilitate something like that.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. There are hands over here that I saw before. Yes. There were two, I believe. Yeah, this gentleman, one behind.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to thank the SROs. I've been teaching in the Albany City Schools for 3 decades, and I can vouch for the job that they do. They're there as a partner with us, and hats off to you guys. I'd love to see the program expand. But my question was it came to mind when I heard about the motorcycles. What is the rule for operating a motor vehicle? I almost got clipped on Lark Street. I was on the sidewalk, and someone came by me probably 20 miles an hour, and I mean just got out of the way. Can you operate these motorized bicycles without license and insurance? Or are there some sort of any regulations as to their operation?
For the motorized bicycles,
Yes.
yeah, you do not need a license. They do not need to be registered for the motorized bicycles, no. You do not need to have those registered or licensed.
Is there anything that states they need to operate in a roadway as opposed to a sidewalk or any type of?
Yeah, they do need to be on the roadway. They're not supposed to be on the, no bicycle is supposed to be on the sidewalk. But you do not, that is one of the controversies when the electric, when the motorized scooters and when the motorized bicycles started, was whether or not they would have to be registered and licensed, and you do not need to be licensed or registered, but they're not supposed to be on the sidewalk.
I will say, I'm sorry, but Carol pointed to me. Oh,
Yes.
okay. I didn't mean to interrupt, but the Common Council is working on codifying these new electric modes of transportation. We've been working on, the city code is so obsolete. I mean, it still includes, as you know, horses and, so.
And we saw a few of those.
But we're working on it. We're actually going to be discussing it at a law committee meeting, I believe, is on the agenda for tomorrow night.
And what is the proposal?
The proposal has to do with making the rules and regulations really clear around these motorized modes of transportation that aren't necessarily covered under motorcycles and vehicles.
And, yeah, thank you for your patience.
I just wanted to thank you for bringing up the co-responder model. And I was hoping you would elaborate a little bit more. I really feel like with this community policing model, the transparency breeds trust with the community. So you had mentioned social workers. I know social workers were previously in this in the budget before, but that's a proven model that doesn't work.
What does work and what has been proven by municipalities like Denver, Memphis, is like the co-responder model, where they're actually paired with either mental health clinicians or mental health specialists, peer specialists, that both go on patrol, walk the beat, or have separate departments, either within the city or within the police department.
Sure.
So I would love for you to kind of expand on what type of job titles you're talking about, and where you may get those resources from, because we have plenty of organizations, community organizations right here in the Capital District that certify peer specialists, that have certified peer recovery advocates, that would just be incredibly useful to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes, I missed that for a minute, I'm sorry. So when it comes to the different models, what we're trying to create is an alternative first response. Because most peer recoveries, most case managers, that's not first response, that's second response. That's us saying, hey, here's Brendan Cox, he's unhoused, he's got unmet behavioral health issues. Can somebody figure out how to get him services? Can somebody figure out what he needs? That's not responding to somebody called 911 because Dunkin' Donuts at Pine and Pearl has a guy hanging out in front, living in a tent, causing all kinds of disorder and creating issues for the business, for the person down. That's not creating that first response. Co-responder, like you said, is taking that social worker, taking that clinician, putting them in a car with Nick and saying, you guys are going to handle 911 calls. There's also community responders where the social worker, where the crisis workers, they're going out, I'm going to use these two chairs, they're going out together by themselves and they're handling calls for service. And the officer's not necessarily even there. They have some places, they have direct contact with the officers, they can get a hold of them. Some places they're working for an agency and they have no contact with the officers. So what we're looking to do, and the original concept of the social work program in Albany was going to be that a person was going to sit on a revision tests. Not that. So, right.
We need a rest of
Yeah, right, yeah, so that's not happening. So, this will be mainly a community responder initiative, where the crisis workers, because like for some reason they told me I can't have MSW working for me, even though I have an MSW working for me before, whatever. So, this will be mainly the crisis workers working in pairs, out on the street, sometimes handling non-emergency calls, not necessarily 911 calls, not people in acute crisis. But, hey, that guy's down at Pine Pearl, he's creating some problems for folks. You guys go ahead with this call, rather than Tim and Nick go ahead with the call. There will be times when Tim and one of the crisis workers, or Tim and two of the crisis workers, will go out together and work. So there will be some crossover into the co-response. So it will be kind of a hybrid of both. Because most of the community responder models aren't the people working for the police department. They're working for other outside agencies. But they're already,
which is important.
I'm sorry.
And non-uniform.
Right, and these folks will be identifiable, so people know what they're doing, but like we started to buy some cars, so but they're not gonna be, it's not gonna be, hey, they're in a police uniform, when they're out there, it's gonna be recognizable, they're not gonna be wearing a vest. They're like, this isn't gonna be, for the 8 years I was away, I was doing work for law enforcement assistance program, the program that we brought here in 2015. So I'm not gonna say I'm an expert, because I don't like using that term, but I'm pretty well versed on the different models and the different things we need to do. And we have people in this room that are also really good, both from within the department and folks like yourself that understand a lot of different things. So we are, at the end of the day, they are going to be out on the street, they are going to be engaging with people, and they are going to need to be able to connect to those other service providers to be able to say, hey, I've got Brendan Cox, and we're engaging with him, we've responded to this call, we're building a relationship, but he needs housing, he needs
That was going to be my
treatment,
part
he needs,
too.
right, because we're not going to be providers for that, so we're going to need that follow-up, so we're going to be doing a lot of that. So yeah, so it's going to be a little bit of a hybrid, but they're not going to be sitting on desks, that's not what they're going to be doing, they're going to be out in the community, engaging with people, they're going to be working with other providers. No, Jenny's been doing a ton of work around this with Lead and working with the other providers as well, so they're going to be doing a ton of engagement around that, And yeah, it'll definitely be not only to reduce arrest, but it'll also be to get really, it's my philosophy that the first time we engage with somebody who's living in a tent, it shouldn't be somebody in a uniform. I don't think that makes any sense. There's times when it makes sense for us to be the ones responding, absolutely. But there's also plenty of times when it makes more sense. And I'm just going to continue to use the word social worker because I use it in a broad category, or somebody that's more of a social worker here, or somebody who's going to need somebody more at their level. So that way, the first time somebody sees somebody, it's not a badge, and they think, well, I'm about to get arrested, because although it's been a long time since I've answered a call for service, I also know that the uniform can create a barrier for us, because sometimes we spend 10 minutes talking the person down, like, I'm not here to arrest you, and I'm here to help you out, like, it's okay, and then the person's like, oh, okay, no, they're not here to give you all the time, like, they're here to actually help you out, and I want to try to break that barrier down a little bit, so yeah, it'll be a little bit of a
I would love to keep this going
Yeah.
and connect with whatever you have,
Please.
and connect you to any
Yeah.
resources that I can bring to you.
Yeah.
So I'll give you my card, we can talk about it.
Please, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question and the clarification on both sides. We have a question over here, and I believe this is going to be our last one for the night because we are moving soon.
Well, I'm going to make this quick. I'm Carolyn McLaughlin, and I'm a county legislator, and I'm representing part of the South End. And I want to know, do you see any value in the intersection of the city, county, and state public safety personnel working together to protect the city of Albany, particularly at this time when we're down 80 or so officers? And, and what are the challenges that would come along with that, if there are any?
Thank you, Carolyn. Good to see you. So I absolutely do, and there are initiatives that we run in coordination. We have a detail right now that we work, we're doing it on Thursday nights with the state police, and it's a very coordinated approach where the state police are working hand in hand with us on ensuring that when they come into the city, we know what they're doing, they know what we're doing. We have it both for patrol and investigations, and I see that growing. And I always look at that as a supplemental approach. But it's got to be coordinated, there's got to be communication, and it's got to be desired by all parties.
Do you have any opinion? I mean, are you receptive to that? As to the department? And I know
By the fact that I just said the state police are here and working with us, I will give that as my affirmative answer. But all parties need to be receptive, and they need to work with these guys, and they need to work well with them, and not, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Cool.
Oh, you have some?
Oh, were you going to say something? I was going to wrap it up.
Oh, no, I was gonna, go ahead.
All right.
Wow, thanks everyone. Thank you, Chief, and everybody for your great conversation. We will be sticking around afterwards for anyone who wants to talk. Also, I believe our plan is to answer questions. Are there any topics? Oh, this is really important. Are there any topics you would like to see at our next or a future community forum? So that's really important.
The sheets are in the back.
And the sheets are in the back. Those are the sheets that Carol mentioned before. And last but not least, before anybody leaves this room, we need to thank our friend Luke Rumsey and our partner, Peter Albany, for hosting this event. Yeah. So thanks, everyone. Oh, and we have a Facebook page. We have a few Facebook pages. So the one that has the least number of likes